Seattle winters have a way of sneaking up on you, cold enough to sting, gray enough to swallow the sky whole. That morning, as Jake Turner hurried down Pine Street with his backpack bouncing against his shoulder, the air tasted sharp, almost metallic. He was late, again, and every minute felt like a stone dropping straight into his stomach. Cars rolled past in impatient waves, engines rumbling, horns cutting through the chilly air. People walked fast, bundled in puffy jackets and wool scarves, eyes glued to their phones. Nobody really looked at anyone. It was just another busy morning in an overworked American city. But then Jake saw her, a frail, blind, elderly woman, standing alone at the corner, her white cane trembling in her gentle, wrinkled hand. Her shoulders were small, slightly rounded, wrapped in an old beige coat that looked far too thin for the weather. She reminded him of someone soft-spoken and heartfelt, like the kind of grandmother who'd still bake cookies long after her hands had grown too shaky. The crosswalk light blinked red. Cars kept streaming by, and she stood there, still, quiet, vulnerable. Jake slowed. His breath caught. He could have kept walking. A dozen people already had. Everyone had somewhere to be, something to worry about. And he was late enough that his boss would explode if he showed up even 5 minutes behind. But something inside him refused to look away. "Ma'am," he said softly, stepping closer. "Do you need help crossing?" The woman's face lifted toward his voice. Behind her dark glasses, she seemed hopeful, almost relieved. "Oh, thank you, dear," she whispered, her voice warm but tired. "These streets have gotten so noisy. I can't tell when it's safe anymore." Jake offered his arm, steady and reassuring, her fragile hand wrapped around it. The light changed. They crossed slowly, the wind brushing against them as traffic finally paused. Jake adjusted his steps to match her careful pace, shielding her from the cold gusts and the restless hum of cars. "You're very kind," she murmured. "I'm just glad I could help," he replied. But before he could say anything else, a sleek black SUV screeched to the curb behind them. The door flew open, and a young woman, sharp, determined, and breathless, rushed toward them. "Grandma," she gasped, "what are you doing out here alone?" Jake froze, and just like that, his entire day shifted. "Grandma, you scared me half to death." The young woman's voice cracked with worry as she reached for the elderly lady's hands. Up close, she looked polished and professional. Dark coat, sharp eyes, phone still in her grip. But beneath that was something fragile, something deeply human. Jake stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware of how awkward he must look standing between them. I'm sorry," he said, embarrassed. "She was trying to cross and—" The young woman shook her head quickly. "No, don't apologize, thank you." Her tone softened into something genuine and grateful. "Really, thank you for helping her." "Madison," the blind woman chided gently. This young man was a perfect gentleman. Madison let out a shaky exhale, the kind that comes from too much stress and too little sleep. "Grandma, you can't just wander out here by yourself. Seattle traffic isn't kind to anyone, let alone—" "I know," Mrs. Eleanor murmured, patting her granddaughter's hand. "But I felt cooped up, and this corner always felt familiar. Safe." Jake offered a small, understanding nod. He knew that feeling, wanting freedom even when the world said you needed help. A brief silence settled between them, warm but tense. Madison finally straightened, her controlled corporate composure returning. "Thank you again," she told Jake, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer than necessary. There was curiosity there, and something else he couldn't name. Jake adjusted his backpack, forcing a polite smile. "I should get going. Running a little late." He didn't tell them how late. As he walked away, he could feel Madison watching him. And for reasons he couldn't explain, the weight of her gaze stayed with him long after he disappeared into the cold morning rush. He had no idea his world was about to collapse, or that she would be the reason it built itself again. By the time Jake reached the glass doors of Briggs & Hale Financial, his chest was tight and his palms were damp. He swiped his badge, praying the system wouldn't flag how late he was. No such luck. Standing right inside the lobby, arms crossed, jaw clenched, was Randall Briggs, his manager. A tall, stern man with a habit of speaking like every sentence was a reprimand. "20 minutes late," Randall said flatly. "Again!" Jake swallowed hard. "I know, sir. I'm sorry. There was a woman. She needed help crossing the street and—" Randall cut him off with a scoff sharp enough to slice through the air. "You think this company pays you to be a neighborhood hero?" Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. Colleagues passing by slowed, pretending not to listen, but obviously intrigued. That familiar mix of embarrassment and frustration made his stomach twist. I wasn't trying to cause problems, Jake said quietly. She was blind. I couldn't just leave her. And now you're late, Randall snapped. Late is late. You've already been warned. Jake's breath caught. Something about Randall's tone felt final. Too final. Before he could respond, Randall delivered the blow with a cold, emotionless voice. You're done here. Effective immediately. Clean out your desk. The words hit harder than Jake expected. A few coworkers looked over with soft, startled sympathy, but no one stepped forward. Nobody challenged the decision. That was office culture. Silent, rigid, fearful. Jake's vision blurred as he packed his small box of belongings. A mug from his mom, a faded photo of his sister, a notebook filled with ideas he might never get to use now. Outside, the winter air slapped his face as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Jobless, humiliated, defeated. But beneath the frustration, one truth stuck with him. He'd helped someone who needed him. And somehow, that still felt right. The next afternoon, after a long and restless night, Jake wandered into Sunrise Brew, a cozy neighborhood cafe with warm lights and the smell of cinnamon drifting through the air. He needed something. Caffeine, comfort, or maybe just a quiet place to think. Losing his job had left him shaken, unsure of what direction his life was supposed to take now. He ordered a simple black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu, and found an empty corner table. As he wrapped his hands around the warm cup, trying to calm the anxious thrum in his chest, a familiar voice floated across the room. Shakashamai, Jake? He froze. There, sitting by the window with her coat draped over the chair, was Madison Hale, the same woman from yesterday, the worried granddaughter, the one with the sharp eyes and soft heart hiding behind her polished exterior. She looked just as surprised as he felt. I thought that was you, she said, standing and approaching his table. Her tone was gentle, almost cautious. I never got to thank you properly for helping my grandmother. Jake forced a small smile. Really, it was nothing. Her eyes softened in a way that made the cafe feel smaller, warmer. It wasn't nothing. Not to her. Not to me. She hesitated, studying him with a kind of empathetic curiosity he wasn't used to. You look tired. Are you all right? Jake swallowed. He wasn't the type to spill his problems to strangers, especially not strangers who looked like they stepped out of a boardroom. But something about Madison felt sincere, grounded, safe. I lost my job, he admitted, voice quiet. Madison blinked, stunned. What? Because you helped her. Because I was late, he said with a humorless laugh. But yeah, that was the reason. A mix of guilt and anger flashed through her expression. It was subtle but unmistakable. Jake, she whispered, almost breathless. You have no idea just how wrong that is. He frowned, confused. But Madison already knew something he didn't, and it was about to change everything. For a moment, Madison just stood there, stunned, her coffee untouched on the table behind her. Then she pulled out the chair across from Jake and sat down, her expression shifting into something firm and determined, like someone who had just made up her mind about something important. Jake, she began, voice steady but tinged with frustration. You didn't deserve what happened yesterday. Jake shrugged lightly, trying to make it smaller than it felt. It's fine. Life happens. No, she insisted, leaning forward. It's not fine. You did something compassionate, something most people wouldn't even bother to do. Her gaze softened, sincere and warm-hearted. My grandmother, she means everything to me. What you did mattered. Jake felt a strange stir in his chest, half gratitude, half discomfort. Thank you, but that doesn't change the fact that I got fired. Madison exhaled slowly, bracing herself. Actually, it does. Jake frowned. What do you mean? Madison hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. Then with a small sigh, she said the words that would tilt Jake's entire world. I'm the new CEO of Briggs & Hale. Jake's breath hitched. Wait, what? She nodded, a mixture of pride and vulnerability flickering in her eyes. I took over a few months ago. Quietly. There were internal issues and I needed time to assess everything before making big moves. Jake stared at her, stunned into silence. Madison continued, her voice gentle now. Your firing wasn't just unfair, it was a sign of a bigger problem inside the company. And I'm fixing that. Starting now. He blinked, unsure whether to trust the sudden burst of hope forming inside him. Then Madison said something even more unexpected. Words spoken softly, but with absolute conviction. I want you back, Jake. Not in the same job. In a better one. One that fits the kind of person you really are. Jake felt his heart stumble. Because for the first time in days, a door was opening instead of closing. Jake wasn't sure what surprised him more. Madison's offer, or the sincere, almost earnest way she looked at him while making it. In his world, kindness usually came with conditions. But her expression held no hidden agenda, no corporate polish, just honesty. Why me? He finally asked, his voice quiet, cautious. I'm not some impressive candidate. I don't have fancy credentials. Madison shook her head gently. That's not what I'm looking for. I want people with integrity, people who see others, people who don't walk past someone just because they're busy. She paused, thoughtful. That's rare, Jake, and it matters. The sincerity in her tone made his chest tighten in a way he didn't expect. Still, he hesitated. If I come back, I don't want special treatment. I don't want people thinking I'm there because I know the CEO. Madison offered him a soft, understanding smile, the kind that felt strangely comforting. Then earn it, she said simply. Prove them wrong. Prove me right. Something in that challenge lit a spark inside Jake, a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. The days that followed moved quickly. Jake accepted the new role, project coordinator for Hope Bridge, an initiative focused on helping underserved communities. The work felt meaningful, grounded, human, something he could actually be proud of. And Madison? She checked in often, sometimes too often, dropping by to review plans, asking thoughtful questions, or simply offering encouragement when he looked overwhelmed. They talked about more than work, childhood stories, fears, dreams, the silent pressures adulthood brings. Their conversations grew longer. Their laughs came easier. Their walls lowered slowly, almost reluctantly. Jake tried to ignore the warmth growing between them, the quiet spark. Madison did too. Both of them knew the boundaries, the risks, the rumors waiting to happen. But sometimes when their eyes met across the conference table, steady and lingering, something unspoken passed between them. A connection neither one was ready to name, yet neither could deny. At first, Jake thought he was imagining it, the sudden hush that fell whenever he walked into the break room, the sideways glances exchanged between coworkers, the subtle but unmistakable shift in the office atmosphere. But by the end of the week, it was impossible to ignore. Whispers traveled faster than emails in corporate America. Why him? He barely worked here before. Must be nice knowing the CEO. The comments were quiet, but the judgment behind them was loud enough to sting. Jake pretended not to hear, but his shoulders grew tighter each day. He worked harder, stayed later, hoping results would silence the rumors. But gossip had its own momentum. Cold, careless, fueled by envy and assumption. Madison noticed, of course. She had always been observant, especially when it came to people she cared about, though she'd never admit that part out loud. You okay? She asked one afternoon as they reviewed community outreach proposals. Her tone was gentle, cautious, almost vulnerable. Jake forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm fine. You're not, she said softly. And the comments people are making, they're unfair. You're doing incredible work, Jake. He appreciated her words, but they only made the ache sharper. It doesn't matter what you think, he murmured. People already believe what they want. Madison looked away, jaw tightening. The situation was delicate. If she defended him too openly, the rumors would only grow louder. If she stayed silent, it felt like betrayal. Meanwhile, Mrs. Eleanor sensed the distance in her granddaughter's voice during their evening calls. Child, she said gently, good hearts always attract envy, but kindness leaves its own kind of proof. Jake didn't hear that advice, but he would soon need it, because the shadows around him were only beginning to form, and a much bigger storm was on its way. The tension in the office finally snapped when an unexpected email hit everyone's inbox. Mandatory meeting. Conference room A. Company-wide audit announcement. Jake felt his stomach drop. When he and the department leads filed into the room, they found a group of strangers waiting. Sharp-dressed auditors with stern expressions and thick binders tucked under their arms. They looked methodical, unyielding, the kind of people who saw the world in spreadsheets rather than human stories. Then Madison walked in. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a seriousness that made the whole room sit up straighter. "We're beginning a full internal audit," she announced. "Every department, every process, every project." Her voice was steady, controlled, but Jake could hear the strain beneath it. The auditors wasted no time. Within hours, they were hovering around the Hope Bridge project like hawks, asking questions, requesting documents, highlighting numbers in bright, scolding neon ink. Why is the training budget higher than projected? Why partner with small organizations instead of established ones? Why are results slower than industry benchmarks? Each question felt like a punch. Jake answered as best he could, but the cold, intimidating tone of the audit team made even his confident decisions sound uncertain in his own ears. By evening, his head throbbed, and his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He stayed late, poring over spreadsheets, trying to anticipate every possible criticism. The work he had poured his heart into, work that had real faces, real stories, was now being reduced to rigid numbers and red flags. When Madison stopped by his office door, she found him hunched over the desk, exhausted and overwhelmed. "This isn't about you," she said quietly. "It's about fixing what's broken." But Jake couldn't shake the fear curling inside his chest. That the storm wasn't just about the company, it was about to swallow him whole. By the third day of the audit, Jake felt drained, like every ounce of confidence had been scraped out of him. Spreadsheets, reports, projections, none of it seemed enough to prove the heart behind Hope Bridge. The auditors saw inefficiency. Jake saw people. And finally, he decided they needed to see them too. So he arranged a field visit. The auditors arrived at the community center looking stiff and skeptical, clipboards in hand. But the moment they walked inside, the atmosphere shifted. Warm chatter, the smell of homemade chili simmering in the kitchen, and walls covered with hand-drawn thank you posters. The first to greet them was Rosa, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes but a bright, grateful smile. "I used to work 2 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on," she told them. "Hope Bridge helped me get certified. Now I have a stable career. My kids see me as strong again." Then came Marcus, a young veteran who had once been homeless. "Jake got me into carpentry training," he said quietly. "I've got a place now, a future. That number in your report? That's me." Story after story flowed, raw, heartfelt, unpolished. The auditors shifted uneasily, their firm expressions softening. These weren't statistics. They were human beings standing right in front of them. And then a little boy tugged on Jake's sleeve, holding up a drawing of him and Madison standing beside a giant sun. "One day," the boy said proudly, "I want to help people too." Jake swallowed hard, shaken by the weight of it. When they left the center, the lead auditor paused, studying Jake with newfound respect. "We'll need to revisit our assessment," she said, her voice unusually gentle. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in Jake's chest. Quiet, steady, genuine. Because numbers told one story, but people told the truth. The audit results came back faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, a heavy, nervous buzz filled the entire office. People whispered in hallways, pretending to work while stealing glances at Madison's closed office door. Then it happened. Security escorted Randall Briggs through the lobby, his face pale, his expression tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. The man who once barked orders and strutted down the hall with smug authority now looked exposed and defeated. Word spread like wildfire. The audit had uncovered everything: inflated invoices, ghost vendors, hidden kickbacks. Years of manipulation wrapped in spreadsheets and fake signatures. The kind of scandal that didn't just get someone fired, it destroyed reputations. Jake watched from a distance, conflicted. Randall had humiliated him, judged him, discarded him. Yet seeing him fall still stirred something complicated inside. Sadness, maybe, or the realization that everyone carries secrets no one else sees. But Randall wasn't leaving quietly. As he passed a cluster of employees, he stopped, pointing a trembling finger toward Jake's workspace. "You think he's innocent?" Randall spat, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "He's only here because the CEO has a soft spot for him. Ask yourselves why." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Jake felt heat climb up his neck, an accusing, unfair spotlight burning straight through him. His throat tightened. Madison stepped out of her office just in time to hear the accusation. Her jaw clenched, fury blazing behind her usually composed expression, but she stayed silent. She had to. Anything she said now would only fuel the fire. Security pulled Randall toward the elevators, but his bitter words lingered, poisoning the air long after he disappeared. Jake stood frozen, the weight of suspicion crashing over him. In a single moment, his greatest breakthrough had become his greatest vulnerability. And the damage was only beginning. For days after Randall's accusation, the office felt different, colder, sharper, full of eyes that lingered a little too long. Jake worked quietly, head down, feeling the weight of every whisper. Even though the audit had cleared him of any misconduct, suspicion clung to him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Madison kept her distance, professional on the outside, but inside she was restless, torn between responsibility and the growing ache in her chest. The board had made their verdict clear. She and Jake must not work directly together anymore. 6 months of separation, 0 exceptions. It felt like punishment for something she hadn't even allowed herself to fully feel. By the end of the week, Jake's apartment felt heavier than ever. He sat on his worn-out couch, staring at the rain streaking down the window. Seattle rain, steady and thoughtful, like the sky trying to say something. A sudden knock startled him. When he opened the door, there she was. Madison, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes shimmering with frustration and something heartbreakingly vulnerable. "Jake," she breathed, voice trembling. "I can't do this anymore." He blinked, stunned. "Do what?" "Pretend I don't care. Pretend this, whatever this is between us, doesn't matter." Her voice cracked, raw and honest. "I tried to be the perfect CEO, the rule follower, the strong one. But I'm miserable, and I know you are too." The confession hit him like warm light after weeks of darkness. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer. "Madison, what are you saying?" She looked up at him, rain dripping from her lashes, heart laid bare. "I'm saying I don't want to lose you. Not to rumors, not to fear, not to rules written by people who don't know us." For a moment, neither moved. Then Jake reached for her hand, gentle, steady, certain, and she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, something long denied finally broke open. They stood together in the doorway. Two people choosing honesty over fear, choosing each other despite everything coming their way. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt whole again. Spring arrived slowly in Seattle, washing away winter's gray heaviness. The rain softened, the air warmed, and for the first time in months, Jake felt something rising inside him, something like peace. The board eventually recognized the impact Hopebridge had made. The audit revealed not just corruption, but also the undeniable success of the community programs Jake helped build. The organization was nominated for a national award honoring social impact, an honor that shocked Jake more than anyone. On the night of the ceremony, he stood backstage in a borrowed suit, palms sweaty, heart pounding. He wasn't used to crowds or applause. He was used to blending in quietly, just trying to do the right thing. But tonight was different. The auditorium hummed with energy as Madison stepped to the microphone, her presence calm but radiant. She spoke about integrity, second chances, and the unseen heroes hidden inside ordinary people. And finally, she said, voice steady and proud, "This project would not exist without one man, someone whose compassion changed not only our company, but my life." Her eyes searched the room until they found Jake in the front row. "Please welcome Jake Turner." The audience rose in a warm, thunderous ovation. Jake felt humbled, overwhelmed, but deeply grateful. As he walked on stage, Madison reached for his hand, not secretly, not hesitantly, but openly, confidently. Together, they accepted the award. Later, as the applause faded, Mrs. Eleanor approached them slowly, her cane tapping softly against the floor. Her smile was tender, nostalgic. "Do you know why I crossed that street alone that morning?" she asked Jake, her voice gentle. "I wanted to remind Madison that the world still has good people. And then you appeared, like you'd been meant to walk by at exactly that moment." Jake's chest tightened with emotion. Madison squeezed his hand. "Guess Grandma was matchmaking before I even knew it." They laughed softly, the kind of shared laughter that comes from surviving storms together. As the night wound down, the three of them walked outside. The city lights glowed softly against the sky, reflecting off the wet pavement, Seattle's familiar, comforting shine. Jake looked at the crosswalk nearby, the very place where everything began. "I never imagined helping a stranger would lead me here," he said quietly. Mrs. Eleanor smiled. Kindness has a funny way of coming back around, dear. Madison rested her head lightly against Jake's shoulder, her voice warm and sincere. Sometimes the smallest moments change our whole lives. They stood there, three different lives woven together by one simple act of compassion. Have you ever made a small choice, one simple act, that unexpectedly changed the direction of your life? Share your story below. Someone out there might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more emotional, uplifting stories like this. Your support helps these heartfelt stories reach more people who need hope.